Welcome back to the Fish Files. Today we're going to talk about feeding your aquarium fish the proper amount and the proper food. And to keep me honest, I brought in Viral Cerati, the fish geek from one of the oldest renowned aquarium companies in the world, Sarah. When you have a balanced aquarium and everything's going well, the only component you're introducing that can't naturally be coming into this tank is fish food. That makes it a critical component to do right. So when do you know you're feeding your fish too much first?
When you feed fish, typically treat them as grazers, right? So they need to eat a little bit throughout the day rather than one big amount per day. Unless you have predators, then they typically like to gorge like a lion would and kind of not eat for a while.
Since they're grazers, why not just put a bunch of food in there so they can nibble at it throughout the day?
So if you have a dog and you feed your dog, at the end of the feeding, it goes outside in the backyard, does his business, comes back in the house, right? Fish, think of it as this is their house. So when you feed them in the house, but they can't go somewhere else to do their business.
Yeah, don't let your fish outside.
Yeah. Keep them wet. Simple rule. When you feed fish, and the quality of the food matters because you're actually polluting their environment. If you don't feed it properly too much, let's say 5 minutes, and you have a whole flake food storm.
Yeah, when it goes all over the top.
Yeah,
of the tank.
exactly. So you end up feeding the filter as well. You don't want to do that as well.
Feeding your fish is like minimally polluting your fish tank. Very dark way of saying it. So when do you know you're not feeding the fish enough?
Twice a day is perfect.
Okay,
what
twice.
you don't want to do is if you ever have food at the bottom, you stop feeding. Because you've overfed the tank, and you probably want to remove that.
All right.
Because you'll pollute the environment.
So I'm only doing it twice. I don't want to put anything in the bottom of the tank. How do I know when I'm starving them? Do they look skinny?
They won't look skinny, but if you walk by the tank, they'll be all at the top looking for food. So a couple times a day is plenty.
They'll let you know when they're hungry.
Yes, absolutely.
How do you know if you're feeding the right food to the fish?
The most common food used is flake food. You can control how you feed it. So if it's a bigger flakes, bigger fish will eat it. If it's smaller flakes, smaller fish. The other cool thing about flake food is actually put it underneath the water. And now you can feed all levels of your fish.
We actually had a very good question from Julie M. What do I feed my fish if I have top dwellers, medium dwellers, and bottom dwellers? Different fish tend to swim around in different zones, and they also feed in those zones. She was asking, is there a fish food that I could put in my aquarium that feeds all three of those zones?
And the other thing I always recommend is try to mix up the type of foods that you feed. So you can go to small granules that sink slowly.
We might as well get right into it. What kind of fish food do we feed the different fish?
One of the most popular fish out there is a guppy.
Okay.
And guppies typically are more of an algae eating fish. So we have a guppy gram here.
Oh, I didn't know guppies were herbivores. I just assumed they were carnivores.
Yeah, they're opportunists at the end of the day, but as all fish may be. But they specifically do well when you give them the right food that they need. Some people keep catfish or plecos, they call them. And those are kind of the janitorial services of the tank. And what they do is they eat uneaten food. But as time goes on and you perfectly set the amount of food that the rest of the fish want, you can actually feed them, the plecos, basically a little tablet.
I've never seen that. A lot of this comes through our place, the Hikari algae wafers. Basically, these are algae wafers as well?
Yeah, plecos, there's two types of plecospis. One are meat eaters and one are herbivores, and obviously plant-based. A pleco's diet, they naturally have wood.
Earlier episode suggesting whenever you have any pleco, keep a piece of driftwood in there.
Yes.
Plecos prefer wood.
Kind of like birds that prefer a little bit of gravel to digest food, same principle. This also has elder cone in it as well. So there's got wood and that.
Ooh, elder cone.
Yeah, so elder cones are pretty cool. It's 4% spirulina, which is the big plant part of it.
Spirulina, it'll bring out colors even in a pleco. Definitely brings out the reds, I think, more than anything else. So it's kind of a neat little ingredient to look for if you want to brighten up your fish a bit in the fish tank. For the beginning hobbyists, where do they find these ingredients? They're listed like human food in the back?
Yeah, it's the same way. So us at Sarah, we actually take pride in making sure all our foods contain no dyes, no preservatives.
It sure even says Sarah.
Yes. We make sure that the ingredients that come into your aquarium is the most high quality, because anything that a fish doesn't digest ends up being pollutant, and anything that it doesn't eat is a pollutant. So we make sure that we don't put dyes or anything in there.
Right. We're talking about carbohydrates. I didn't realize fish aren't carbohydrate eaters.
Correct.
Because there's carbohydrates in almost every freaking fish food, except for like freeze-dried treats and
frozen foods.
Frozen foods.
Frozen food is water based, obviously, because it's
that's the binder. Frozen water.
Yeah, frozen water. So the reason that you mentioned carbs, as we try to avoid, fish actually don't have carbs in the wild, so they're not going to go find some rice or anything like that they'll chew on.
They have plants, though.
Yeah,
plants aren't really carbs.
Is salad considered a carb?
No, it isn't.
Okay.
Viral, can you give me just some basic do's and don'ts on feeding your fish?
The most important is pick the right foods, right? So I always recommend flake foods is number one. It's the controllability of it from small fish to large fish is easy. The second thing you want to do is don't overfeed. Don't feed the filter, feed the fish. So if you ever see food on the bottom, that's absolutely, you've killed them with kindness at that point, and they're going to kind of wishing they never had the buffet that you just provided for them. And the third thing is just always look at the fish. And that's not part of the feeding, but you can always tell just by looking at the animal. If it eats, then it's healthy typically. If it's hunkered down in the corner, don't feed the tank. Feeding the fish is almost important. Know when not to feed the fish as well, and kind of watch that. And it might just require a simple thing as a water change.
That's a good point. Yeah, if your fish is clamped and it's moving very lackadaisically, try and find out what's going on with your either your water quality, or there might be some ick. I don't want to bore everyone and talk about every single food, but there are some basics that everyone should be aware of. Good quality flake foods, probably the number one for community fish tanks. Granulated foods go down to the third to the bottom of the tank, and that's great for bottom dwellers. Cichlids, so I always see cichlid pellets, but cichlids eat flake as well, right?
Yeah, depends on the size. Again, if you got a big cichlid, you don't want to give it flake food because it gets messy. As they eat it, you see little particulates go everywhere, and I call it feeding the filter instead of feeding the fish.
And bigger the fish, the fish food.
Exactly. If you have an improper diet for a fish, it's kind of like leaving the milk out. It doesn't go bad immediately, but as time goes on, the fish will slowly kind of be sitting around more. Kind of just like us if we ate some bad food.
That's a good point. I just want to interrupt there. We talked about water changes, fish dying from ammonia spikes. This is a slow, bad way to go. If you don't feed your fish right, he's just going to start developing all kinds of health conditions that aren't visible. And his life is just, he's basically going to live 2 years instead of 5 years. So look for good quality food. Tetra, Sarah, Hikari, try and match up the right food with the right fish.
Don't just go off the packaging. Obviously, we're programmed to go after pretty packaging, but turn it around. And as I like to see the dirty side, so to speak, we take the environment seriously and how we can reduce plastics in general. So sustainability is a big part of it.
I want to conclude though with one remark. These guys wouldn't let me talk about the history because they thought it would be boring. But the only reason any of us are here today in this hobby is because in 1951, there were only 50,000 hobbyists in all of Europe. You had to go out and grow your little bugs and feed your little fish. And then in 1958, the market exploded. And why? Because a guy named Dr. Bench created the first prepared food, and it made fish keeping so easy. And it followed by, I don't know the founder of Sarah, but Sarah started back in 1970. And between those two companies, the market got big all over the world. And so now today we have 240 million hobbyists throughout the world. China's huge, believe it or not. It's not just the United States and Europe. Europe's bigger than the United States. It's all due to coming up with the right prepared foods. I really enjoyed fish geeking over food with you, Viral.
Yeah, thanks for visiting. Thanks for having me.
And we hope next time you're in town, you can come by and we'll come up with something else to talk about in regards to food.
All right, great. Thanks for having me.
We can't wait until you come to our next show, and please subscribe.